Let's get this over with.
Well met. This has been Brode, and you're watching Born to be
Cosmo.
Oh, snap.
Cosmo.
Welcome to Born to be Cosmo, the podcast where we talk about all things Marvel Snap. I am joined by two of my favorite people, Nate Wolfe and ZombiesGoNomNom. And we've got a good show for you today. Like always, our twice monthly schedule means that there's always a lot of things to talk about. And we just had a very significant balance update to the game on the OTA last Thursday. So we're going to be focusing on that. But before we dive into the exciting balance changes that we're all experiencing on ladder, how are you guys doing?
Pretty good. I'd been happy that, we started the new year off with a very interesting patch. I guess it's technically the second patch, right? We had the main patch, but this is really, I think, what, everyone was kind of waiting to see. And yeah, it's been fun. It's been nice to see that the thing that was very clearly a problem is being attempted to be dealt with.
I still feel a little bit like it's kind of a clown fiesta, but I'm having a good time. I'm doing pretty well. I finally got the giant treadmill out of my office, which is exciting, and I got a really good job offer yesterday, and so I'm doing quite good.
Congrats again, Nate.
Thank
I know
you.
It's been a journey.
Oh God, it's been 4 months of terrifying, but I'm anyways. I'm excited to hang out with you all and talk about some cards, and yeah, let's do the thing.
Yeah, we're not broadcasting this live at our normal time, which I don't think it's been normal now for months.
Yeah.
But I think we're pretty much where we want to be. And yeah, the big balance, the big OTA update was, I think a lot of people were looking forward to it. Just as a little bit of a reminder, what the meta looked like before the OTA, it was the Blob. Thanos Blob, but other flavors of Blob, and it was posting what looked like tier S or tier 0 numbers. And yeah, I noticed a lot of Snap streamers going the variety route, and not just the ones that I frequent, but it looked like a lot of folks were dipping their toes because it was pretty painful, I think, for a lot of people who were playing the game. So yeah, let's just dive right in and review the changes, and we'll start with the Meta King and Tyrant themselves, Blob. So this is interesting because not only did Blob have their stats, their numbers, power, and cost changed, but they also gave Blob a text change, which is something that we know they have the capability of doing through an OTA, which is basically an update that's over the air that doesn't require a download from Steam or the App Store. And but they've been very sparse with using it. I think that it comes with high risk of issues, just my own hypothesizing. But they did that for the Blob. So I don't have the Blob's text in front of me because I am a terrible host.
I can read it.
Perhaps, yeah, you could take us through the change, Nate. Thank you.
Yeah, so Blob previously was a 6/4 with text that said on reveal, merge your deck into this and gain its total power. Ongoing can't be moved. The new change, it's now a 6/0 starting, and the text says on reveal, merge cards from your deck into this until it gains 15 or more power. Ongoing can't be moved. So it stops now. I mean, if this card has been really like reworked, right? So it'll merge cards until it hits 15 or more, depending on what card it hit to push it over that bump, and then it stops, right?
Yeah, Glenn had a good, Glenn Jones, the principal, I think leads balance and other functions for the game, had a good example. So if Blob hits the Infinite, it will eat the Infinite, and Blob will be a 6/20, and it will stop eating cards in your deck. So everything that's in your deck remains. Infinite's gone, gets under Blob, but the rest remain. If it eats Magneto,
It'll keep
then it will be a
going.
12 and it'll eat again. And then at that point, if it eats the Infinite, well, then it'll be 32. And if it eats, I don't know, Power Stone, then it will stop at, well, that would be 15 exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. Quite a few people were kind of confused about it, which I think it's one of those things that becomes clear when you see it in game. But yeah, the text is a little confusing to some folks. But this was the big thing, right? Everyone was kind of worried. Well, it's an OTA. We don't know if they're gonna. Typically, they don't adjust things in text, even though we know they can. They've only ever done it once, I believe. And it was new technology TM that they didn't want to get into a habit of using all the time. Which, I mean, I hope it does get. I hope they do get to a point where they feel a bit more comfortable using it. I mean, maybe they do if they're doing it with Blob, but I think Blob was kind of an emergency scenario because imagine having to put up with old Blob for another like 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think that would have gone over very well with people. So yeah, this was a nice change. I think it accomplished the goal. Blob is it was just an insta-win card, right? Like you play it on turn 6, and the vast majority of the time you won the lane.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still good at doing what he originally did, which is being a big thing to play on turn 6 to win a lane. But now it feels like if you're already fighting for that lane, yeah, it's more reasonable to actually compete with Blob a lot of the time. And also him losing that 4 base power makes him more susceptible to Shadow King, which maybe now that we're seeing more decks than just the Thanos deck, maybe Shadow King creeps back in a little more since he has more things to hit than just Blob. So I think as far as changes go, this was a pretty good change. And it also gives them room where, hey, maybe Blob is still too strong. Maybe we see in like a week or two, Blob is still the best card in Thanos and the best card in other decks. And if he's too strong, they can adjust that number more. Whereas before, there wasn't really much you could tweak about the card without actually giving it a full text change. So this also really helps Darkhawk too, by the way, where if Thanos is playing this, that Blob is not eating the whole deck a lot of the time. So that was a real big issue for Darkhawk.
Yeah.
Was Blob would just eat the whole deck, and then Darkhawk was useless. And so at least versus the Thanos version, Darkhawk, I feel like, really appreciated this change.
Yeah.
Yeah, Darkhawk went from being a really strong card into Thanos, right? It was always the release valve in the Thanos meta to basically being a liability because Blob would just make it a 4-0, right? Yeah. I think that we were speculating what they would do with Blob because I had no idea. This is closely to what a lot of people proposed about a cap. The difference here is that Second Dinner did what they love to do, which is they did put a cap on it, but the card still is variable, right? There's a random element, right? So maybe sometimes you'll get low rolled or high rolled. It also makes it frustrating to play against because you don't know what the break points are. If you're a player that likes to math things out, which you probably should if you're, competitive. So yeah, I think that initial predictions when we saw this was it's still going to be very good, and I think that's true. Looking at Untapped data right now, post Infinite, Thanos Lockjaw, much lower play rate than it was, although still respectable, little over 5%, is the second highest winning deck on post Infinite ladder right now, so it's still very good.
Yeah.
Just maybe by a lesser margin.
The card, I think it was kind of confusing to figure out what it did without playing it because it isn't explained super well, but like I get it now. And it's still good. Yeah, it still seems good. So
that's kind of what you want, right? Like,
well, yeah, I'm glad they didn't kill it. I hate when they do that.
That's the issue, and we'll probably talk about it later, but they've definitely had not the greatest time with balance in the last few months. If you've tuned into the podcast at all, you have probably heard us talk about that. Definitely more than once, many times.
Kind of an understatement. Yeah, it's not their strong point, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it's been kind of rough, and we're gonna talk about it later on, but it'll be interesting to see if that changes, because there have been some questions and answers recently where, it really feels like they also kind of know that, yeah, we could probably be doing a lot better than we have been since the Loki season, it feels like. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay, so Blob's still very good. Or to quote Safety Blade in Frustration, just run the same 12 cards you were running with Thanos before, because
That's
it's
what
the
I
same
do.
12.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're still going to see Blob on ladder. But as someone that also purchased Blob not that long ago, I'm relieved. It's like it's such a strange feeling, right? On the one hand, you purchase the cards, so you don't want your purchase to be invalidated, given that the purchase point is so high in Snap. But also, there's an acknowledgement that the state of the meta prior to the balance patch was absurd, and Blob was clearly it wasn't the problem, but it was a major part of it. And what do you do in that? You kind of don't know what you're hoping for, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of feels bad.
Well, yeah. I don't want to get into it now, but I agree with you. It's the short version.
All right. So the next card, so that was the big change. The rest of the changes were a lot.
That was the only nerf in the patch.
Yeah, they were minor buffs. So I think we can probably get through them pretty quickly and get to the second discussion point. So we had a surprise buff of Destroyer.
The one nobody saw coming or asked for.
No one. Yeah. So
Hey,
Destroyer
I'll have you know, I've been wanting them to fix Destroyer since that was the deck that got me to Infinite in Season 1. Destroyer deserved the buff, even though it's probably largely irrelevant.
Well, it got buffed to the state it was in when it got nerfed. So it now has 16 power. Now, just to kind of make to put it in perspective, since the Blob change, the lowest number I've gotten on Blob was 17. Mm-hmm. That was a low roll. So you can play a 6-16 and have it be 16 consistently, or you can play Blob, and have it be potentially that number, but potentially a much higher one. Anyways, I don't think this is going to be a relevant nerf, but I do find it interesting that it really kind of highlights the disparity between Destroyer and Blob, really highlights the evolution of kind of what the power ceilings and floor are a year and change after global launch, right?
Yes, it's changed a lot, right? It is not nearly like, if you go and look back at the launch meta, it's like kind of unrecognizable, honestly.
Could you imagine hitting Infinite with Destroyer? Well, yeah, I guess you could if you farmed bots, but I mean, like, in a competitive space, could you imagine climbing with Destroyer? Like,
I kind of want to try out the old Destroyer deck. I'm not gonna lie. I
two-lane Destroyer?
The theory craft, yeah, ongoing Destroyer, right? Although it's different now because you probably don't want to use Professor X, so it wouldn't play the same. I mean, you might be able to get away with Professor X. I don't know, but
are you still running Warpath? That's the big question.
No, you are certainly not.
All right, well then maybe the deck actually has a shot at being good. I always like Warpath was always the silly card that you had to play just because.
You're just looking for another ongoing, and it put points in a lane, right? And
yep. All right, so that was Destroyer. So
yeah, I don't really have any thoughts on it. It's I mean, it is what it is. It doesn't change it significantly enough to make a difference in my mind. This next one is kind of interesting, though, right? Like this.
I think this one probably frustrated a lot of people, actually. So Viper got its power buffed from 3/4 to 3/5. So we went from being a 2/3 to a 3/4 to a 3/5.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, 3/5s are traditionally a good stat line. So on one hand, it's much better than a 3/4. On the other hand, it seemed the whole reason they nerfed this card to begin with was they were specifically saying, hey, yeah, we did this just in case the Havoc thing got out of hand. It didn't get out of hand. But their justification was like, well, we like her here, so we have more design space to make like a negative thing, a negative 2-drop like the Hood. And I just don't really fully buy into that. I think it's like, I think the real reason is that they think Annihilus stuff is still strong, and they're worried about potentially making it stronger, giving them the old Viper. But the old Viper was never even really a mainstay in Annihilus. Like, yeah, some ran it, but it really wasn't that nuts. But they did say Sentry had some really crazy metrics, so maybe Viper was playing into that, where you go Sentry Viper on the final turn. I don't know.
I don't know.
So really interesting thing about the way the meta shaked out since the OTAs released, like a day and change ago, and of course it's still very early and things are changing, is that if you look at the bounce has a pretty bad win rate. But when you expand the deck selection for bounce, all of the decks are kind of like these janky like move bounce hybrids, which are kind of cool, but obviously not good. Annihilus bounce, though, is an extreme outlier with a 55, almost a 56% win rate with several
It
hundred
feels
games
good.
already logged.
I've ran
So
into it quite a few times. I know Ben was playing it.
yeah,
I think Annihilus Bounce is a very real deck right now.
yeah. But like to your point, I don't think you were probably running Viper in that shell anyways.
No, it hasn't run Viper since the nerf, and even before the nerf, not all of them were running Viper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel
So
like Annihilus was like Galactus Part 2. I feel like they just hate the card. Like they released it and they're like, oh, it's too good. Oh, too many people are playing it. Like
They're just very weird about that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, on one hand, yes, you want people to not be frustrated by things they play against, but people are always going to be frustrated against stuff that they lose to, right? It's like, if you really are that concerned about it, maybe don't print the card like you did if it's that concerning. Like, I don't know. I really hate the Annihilus change. Like, taking a power away from it, sure. But I really hated that they took away the options with it, because
it's the zero thing that really
they
ticked me
told
off.
us that those versions of the deck weren't even very good and were objectively worse than the versions not running it. And they got rid of it anyway because their logic's basically, well, if it's strong without it, we don't need to give it that extra flexibility. But I think that sucks because it just makes deck building more homogenized and less interesting.
Well, now you can't play Debris anymore.
Yeah, and like Safety is forever salty about that one because he had a fun Debris deck he was liking, and that deck just got taken to the trash, even though for the vast majority of players, it probably wasn't performing any better than the normal versions of Annihilus.
Absolutely.
So it's like, why are we limiting a card? And their response really annoyed me when they were like, well, when Annihilus came out, it actually nerfed Debris because Debris' win rate fell. And that really feels like missing the forest for the trees. Because, like, well, yeah, I'm not surprised it fell. Maybe it fell because, people were actually playing the card.
Right. If you look at play rate, because Debris was not even being played, and then
who was playing Debris before Annihilus came out? Like, no playing Debris before Annihilus came out. So, of course, when Annihilus is popular and more people are going to experiment with it and Debris, I'm not surprised that her win rate was lowered. I don't think that's a huge cause for concern, though, because as people move off of Annihilus decks, and truthfully, like, after the change, have any of you seen a Debris? Has anyone seen a single Debris after the change? I sure haven't. So maybe her win rate's better, but her play rate is just non-existent, so it doesn't matter.
I apologize for the people who aren't familiar with Magic the Gathering, but I feel this analogy is apt. If Second Dinner was back on MTG, right? The card Counterspell would cost like 2 blue and 3 colorless, and it would counter creatures on odd turns and like instants on even turns.
Yeah.
Like they really seem to be adverse to disruption, right? Think about Galactus, Lockdown.
Surprised Shang-Chi doesn't cost 6.
Junk. Well, Shang-Chi is interesting, but I feel like even like Zombies has said this a few times, but like the erosion of Shang-Chi has been much more graduated, but it is happening. Obviously, they changed 10 power, but now you've got all these cards that can't be destroyed or can't be interacted with, right? That the value, like when I said at the beginning of the show that Blob wasn't the problem, but it was a big part of the problem. This, of course, is just my opinion. I'm not the best player, but I think Kyera is a big part of that problem too, because what it does is all of your cool big 6-cost, heroes or cards are now unshangshiable.
And that's a big part of why Thanos became as good as it was. I mean, don't get me wrong, Blob was overpowered, but I don't think Blob would have elevated the deck to the status it did without Kyera saying, hey, your stones and your big 6-cost cards can't die to the normal things that kill them. Like, that was a huge part of what made it really, really good.
So yeah, even Shang-Chi has kind of been taken down a peg or two. So yeah, they're very.
Hey, he got
very
nerfed. He doesn't hit 9s anymore.
Yeah, well,
that was a great change though, because it actually opened up space for 9 power cards to actually see play. I think that was actually really a good thing overall, because 9 power cards were so unplayable because you pretty much were in the position of, why would I play a 9 power card when I can play a card that's bigger than 9, right?
And that's the power creep that we see between Destroyer and Blob, right? So
yes,
yeah. So yeah, they're very particular about I think that they're sensitive to players that don't like having their game plan disrupted.
definitely.
They want to leave that to the locations like District decks and Weird World. But
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
yeah, only they get to say you can't play your cards. Your opponent can't have a say in them.
Yeah,
Only the locations and secondary. All
that's
right.
a good way of putting it.
So that's Viper. This next change was very interesting and a little bit controversial. So I believe this is clearly a buff. Selene going from a -1 power to 2 power. So a 3-point buff. Going from kind of a weird stat line to almost near premium stat line, or at least the difference there. Yeah, I think that I think that for junk gamers, they can't send Selene over anymore. So those people that enjoyed those types of disruptive strategies weren't too happy to see this.
A lot of people were upset about this, actually, believe it or not.
Yeah. Okay, wasn't it?
And I think most of it was not overly justified, because Selene, as someone who played Selene and these Annihilus decks, I think in the vast majority of them, she wasn't very good. I think there were exceptions. I know Joffrey was one of the people who was not too happy about it, and he was playing a Galactus version. And that was the main one where I can see it being like, oh yeah, having her being negative with the Nihilist probably helps out that deck more, because you don't really care about the power impacting you quite as much in that style of deck. But as someone who tried her when she came out, the card just felt very clunky and awkward, and I think there's just a lot more room to experiment with it now, where this is a card you could play feasibly in a bounce deck now, right? You afflict your opponent's cards with negative stuff, which is generally not a bad thing to do. And then on top of that, like, you actually are putting power on the board. Like, -1 power is so bad. Like, I don't think people understand how bad 1 power is bad. So 2 power less than that for an effect that, if you think about it, like, probably like half the time your opponent just opts to not play the Selene card, right? Because if it hit like a lower power thing, it might be negative power and they just don't want to play it, right? So you're not even getting the negative power value out of her on board, and then you have to figure out how to mitigate the negative power you put on your own card, right? If you're not tossing it away with a Nihilus or a Goblin, like, it's actively a drawback in addition to putting you down a stat on the board. So I think Selene is actually one of the worst cards that is released in a long time. And I think the buff was very warranted.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows a great example of the fact that, and this is one of the things that I think makes balancing the game harder, the way they update the game. Let's say, hypothetically, they get everything right in a test environment, which, I mean, that's probably not the case the vast majority of the time, but let's live in the perfect world where they do get everything right in a test environment for, let's say, next season or something. But they didn't factor in, well, Blob would be nerfed, and Elsa would be nerfed, and Loki would be nerfed. And so all of a sudden, all the things that they got right in that context might not be right anymore under the current context. And I really do wonder what it would have looked like, the meta we just had. What would it have been like if Elsa and Loki and Tech Alioth, what if all these cards still existed in their original state? Would it have been a blob takeover? Would those cards still have been dominating? It would have been interesting to see. I think stuff still would have been broken and probably frustrating, but I think that the fact that they update the game so much in terms of balance, while it can be a good thing, also makes it way, way harder to actually get things right on the first try, because by the time the card's releasing, the game is probably different than when these cards were designed.
Yep.
Yeah. The only thing, my only, I enjoyed playing Selene with Annihilus, and it just doesn't really work that way anymore. But I mean, it is what it is.
She's still good with it. There's Ben has been playing a list, and I've been trying that too, an Annihilus bounce, where she has felt rather strong. You're not passing her over anymore, but her effect is still strong in that type of deck because you're giving the negative power to like the Hood or a Green Goblin or what have you. And you're running Shadow King, so you can get that negative effect off of your own card. I think she is like almost unquestionably a better card now, especially in that deck than she was before. It's just different. You play her a little bit differently.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, cool.
Well, the next change was speculated about for months, and I think that it was a little bit more muted than some had hoped. Elektra was buffed from a 1/1 to a 1/2. They noted
Let's go.
They noted in the notes they tried different things, but ultimately they settled on this.
This is the one everyone was hoping would kill 2-cost cards, and just they didn't.
So here's the issue. As someone
Yeah.
who wanted that change, and I actually did like a little Twitter poll about that too, and a lot of people liked it. But here's the issue that we would have had if Elektra killed 2-drops. It would have been like a more annoying Black Widow 2.0, I think is what would have happened. So they buffed Black Widow to a 2-cost card, right? And a lot of people like that change because Black Widow was really, really bad before, right? So people were generally pretty happy about it. And what did Black Widow end up like seeing the vast majority of play in? Decks with Beast, so you could deny your opponent 2 draws for very little cost. And that's basically what I think would happen with Elektra. Is it would be fine if she could do it once, or if you gave her the text can only do it once per game. But if you could bounce a 2-cost Elektra, it would be incredibly obnoxious, and it would delete a lot of early game strategies, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
But they said they might keep experimenting with her. It's really just, this is kind of like, well, we're going to make her a bit better, and if we find a better design for her later, we'll try that out, which I'm all for. I love Elektra. I'm sad she was so bad, and I have played her as a 1/2, and it's felt better. People often underestimate the difference 1 power makes. Myself included. There are times I've definitely underestimated a 1 power difference. It actually, that's something I saw recently with Hercules. Like I won a handful of games with Hercules because he was a 7 power card and not a 6. It can be easy to think it's only 1 power, but especially the lower the cost of the card, the more impactful that 1 power is. That's why I think the Selene change is really, really huge. A card going from -1 to 2 power is such a massive buff in terms of like just overall power you're having on the board.
Well, that's a good segue to this next card, which I don't think very many of us were expecting to see changed, but lo and behold, here it is. Dazzler.
This was out of left field.
Yeah, reduced from a 3/2, sorry Silver Surfer Dazzler fans, to a 2/2. And we've seen cards that saw little play at 3. See a lot more play at 2. I'm not sure that Dazzler is going to be one of those cards, but certainly a 2 is a big difference than a 3. It's still +2 power for each location that is full on your side. So assuming you have all 3 lanes filled, She'll be what, 2/4/6, a 2/8?
Yeah, so think about this, right? Maximus got buffed, right? Maximus became a 2/6, and people were like, holy crap, he's a 2/6? Like, 2/6 is pretty insane stats. And Maximus has been pretty good after those changes. And so obviously with Dazzler, it's not going to be a 2/6 all the time. But if you build your deck around it, I've played some Zoo, both Thanos and non-Thanos variety, and it's pretty easy to get Dazzler to a 2/6 or a 2/8 in those decks. And that's quite impressive. Like I won some games because of Dazzler the other night. And I think that would not have been the case if Dazzler were still at 3 cost. 3 cost was just way, way too slow for the benefit you got. So I like this change. I think it's a good change when cards like the design of Dazzler has always been neat. It's just it didn't really fit the context, and they said, we wanted to try and see if it would work well in a Surfer deck. And the issue was Surfer has so many good 3-drops they can include. It was hard to justify running Dazzler because you weren't always, filling up enough spaces. It was rare to fill up all the lanes with Surfer. So it just wasn't really good enough. And at 2, I think it's much more flexible, both trying it out in a deck like Surfer and just more board floody style decks.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's playable now. I mean, I don't know that I will play it, but maybe. But I'm glad that they're willing to look at cards like this that are seeing so little play or that have not a good enough payoff and are willing to make adjustments. Because now at least I'll experiment with it.
It gives you something to try out, right?
They wanted to sell more bubblegum pop bundles while it's still in the shop.
Oh, is that still there?
Yeah.
That's like a month-long one, right?
Yeah. I'm giving it a closer look now.
It's a good variant. It's a pretty good one.
I thought it was going to be one of those, what do they call them? Like the Maria Hill everyday one or casual or whatever they call it, right?
Yeah.
It's a good one.
All right, so that was Dazzler. Next was Hercules, given a +1 bump right after it rotated out of spotlights. There was some people that were frustrated about this too. Although I kind of was like, if you weren't going to buy Hercules at a 4/6, you probably were not going to buy Hercules at a 4/7. So I kind of find that a bit of a silly.
I think it's true though. Like it's just like we're gonna have this happen every single time until something with the balance changes or something with the economy changes. Because it's just gonna keep happening. Where if they miss the mark with cards on release and they buff them later, people want them to buff these unplayable cards, right? Because you want more cards to be playable, but the spotlight system feels so punishing for that. Gladiator was the best example where Gladiator released in the context of the meta he released in, he was bad, and 3/7 was a lot worse than 3/8. So the card was just kind of bad. Everyone called him bad, myself included. And I bought him on a whim because I thought he would be kind of like a fun meme card and the animation was cool. But now he's showing up in a handful of good decks. He's like a real card. And when did Gladiator come out? Was that last month? 2 months ago?
It was last month, I think.
I think. Remember. But yeah, then the people that now that Gladiator's rotated out, it's like, oh, now I want that card because it's showing up and I can't get it.
Yeah, that's the issue, right? Here, I can get a date. Let's see. Gladiator released. I figured I would just search on my YouTube, but I guess I can scroll. It was kind of a while ago. It really wasn't that recent. It was, I think it was 2 months ago. It was before
November 14 through 21.
Okay, so it was 2 months ago because it's January. So 2 months ago. It's been a while is the point, and Gladiator is scheduled to return in Spotlight Caches in February. So what? That's the rest of November, then December, then January. So like 3 months. And that's not great, especially if Gladiator, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's been like a key meta staple, But what happens when that card is a key meta staple and players just don't have the tokens to pick it up? Like the average player doesn't have a horde of tokens they're sitting on.
Sounds like
I
And
a
don't
so
own
skill issue.
Gladiator.
you're just stuck. Like, yeah, you're just
I don't
stuck.
own it.
Yeah,
I
I know.
refuse to get it.
It's just very, and it sucks a lot as someone doing content about the game, because like the most popular questions are, hey, should I buy this? Hey, what do you think of this card?
Yeah.
Hey, is this deck good?
That's
And
a brutal question because
it's like, I don't know how to answer people anymore, because all you can do is give people the best answer at the moment. But then it really sucks for that person where if you said, hey, I went and I bought Blob because it was the best thing, and now it got nerfed, and now I feel bad. I mean, it's not the perfect example because Blob is still a very good and playable card. But like when things like that happen, it's like, well, I don't know, man. What do you want me to do? Like,
Werewolf
the
is a
only
great example.
Werewolf is a perfect example, yeah, because Werewolf, it's still a good card, but it's so much worse
So
than
much
it
worse.
was.
Yeah.
It's just like it's very tough to give people any decent advice because the pace at which the game changes makes it hard to give people advice that sticks.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't.
And it's
Well,
hard to make your choices on spotlights too, because also Hercules happened to get buffed quickly, right? But what are the odds that they decided to take a more prolonged approach like they've done to something like Spider-Man 2099, where they say our internal data says this card is fine, or we're not planning on buffing this right now. And it's like, okay, well, like, how do you know when they're going to do that and when they're not? You don't.
Yeah.
I will say more recently, more often than not, when cards have been bad, they've been a bit better about it than they have been, a couple months ago. So that's nice. But you're really just put in this position of, if you like the intent of what a card is doing, you probably should pick it up, even if it doesn't seem amazing, and maybe even especially if it seems underpowered, because they'll probably want to adjust it and make it more playable. It's just the acquisition and the economy system don't mesh well together, and I think one of those things has to change. Now, maybe if they got balance better on the first go, this wouldn't be as frustrating, right? We're gonna look at a thing in a bit here. I think it was like 14 out of the last 18 cards released have been changed, and I think all of those have been within a month of them releasing. That is an insane number. Like, can we think back
wild.
to a few months ago? They were not, don't get me wrong, they were balance outliers, but they were not missing this hard, both in, I think, overpowered cards and underpowered cards. Like, they've had a very hard time finding that sweet spot, it seems. And it's good that they can correct it and try and make the card better or worse depending on what's needed, but it's not good when people are essentially locked out of their ability to choose whether they want to engage with that card if they didn't decide to gamble on it on that 1 week it was available. And the only solution I've seen that I actually kind of like to this, other than, balance better, or, make the game more generous in terms of tokens, both things I'm not expecting to happen very quickly. It would be great if you could select a spotlight week in a given month. They'll probably never do this because it would require quite a bit of overhaul. They'd have to invest resources into it. It also gets rid of the FOMO aspect a bit. They have like no incentive to do this, so I don't think they're going to do it. But it would be great if, let's say for this month, when you go to your spotlight caches, you can select a week and you can have the future weeks be locked, right? Until they actually are available, so people can't just get them all at the beginning of the month. But wouldn't it be nice if, let's say you were a move fan who wanted Hercules and you didn't get it and you have no interest in the stuff this week or next week, if you could just tap and select last week and then open the caches? Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't that fix pretty much the whole problem, at least with
Well, what you call a problem, I'm sure, is a feature. The whole aspirational ownership, the whole FOMO, the whole.
Oh yeah, FOMO stuff and the amount of work it would take to implement that mean it's probably never going to happen. It's just like, if we lived in a world where, mobile games weren't prioritizing the most FOMO abusive practices possible, I think this would go a long way to kind of fix the issue where oftentimes a card has been nerfed or buffed within the same month it's released. You just give people an opportunity to go back and engage with those spotlights. And it would still be a little FOMO. You'd still have to do it within that month. And once the month is over, it's gone. And you'd have to wait for it to return. But I think it would do a lot to ease the frustrations a lot of players are feeling. Where the most common sentiment I keep seeing over and over and over again is I've never felt so insecure about like what I'm purchasing in this game. I feel like I don't feel secure in buying something. And you gotta imagine that starts to take a toll on people engaging with buying stuff in the game when they don't know what's going to happen, whether it's they buy a card because they like the card and it gets very significantly nerfed and changed, or whether they choose not to buy a card that looks bad and then it eventually becomes a good card that is very hard for them to engage with for the next like quarter of a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or to maybe be a little more succinct, the game economy doesn't marry well to the rate of change.
Yeah,
Well, at least from the gamer's perspective.
that's what I mean when I say they're like fundamentally at odds. KM has brought this up. A number of people have brought this up.
Okay.
And it's like a lot where generally I think people are aside from like, the given quality, because the quality varies a lot. I think people are generally happy that Snap gets more balance changes compared to getting less balance changes, like let's say Magic or Hearthstone or whatever, right? I think people are generally happy that we get these OTA patches rather than we remember what it was like waiting a month for a patch in Snap, right?
Yeah.
Balance issues we've had in the last few months aside, I think everyone can agree the balance issues would have been a lot worse if OTAs had not become a thing. Because we saw how bad that was with things like Shuri and Thanos, and it was not great. And when the game is in a bad spot, you're basically praying that that patch a month out fixes it, or you're stuck with it a whole nother month. And that wasn't a great place to be. So I think a lot of people are generally happy that the OTAs came in, but the economy and specifically how the spotlight system functions just seems to naturally clash with how frequently they want to be able to balance the cards. They said a little while ago they view balance in this game more like balancing like an auto battler than balancing a card game. And I think that very much
MOBA.
shows.
A MOBA?
Yeah, MOBA.
Yeah.
It might have been MOBA, not auto battler. I think that's right. But yeah, like their approach to balance is very different than in a lot of other card games. They aren't operating on this philosophy of every card you have is going to, stay in stone. It's like it's more likely that cards will be changed than not changed over time.
Have you played any MOBAs like seriously or
Um,
casually?
like one or two. It's never
So
really been my genre, but there was like one or two I enjoyed, like Pokemon Unite and
okay,
whatnot.
I played Heroes of the Storm, and I played it like when it was still alive. Well,
Hmm.
it's still alive, but like they haven't made content for it for years. And they say they balance it like a MOB. They want to balance it like a MOBA. I don't know what League of Legends is like or um, Unite, but I do know Heroes of the Storm. And Heroes of the Storm, when they would release new heroes, they would always release them more tuned, higher tuned than other heroes. And they did this for two reasons.
Hmm.
One, the one that everyone jumps to immediately. People want the new thing to be good, and so they chase
Yes.
it and they buy it. But there was another reason for them releasing things overtuned. And this I thought was interesting because there was some truth to it as well. In MOBAs, certain characters take time to become accustomed to. It's a lot of practice. And if you get like a new hero, like when they released Deathwing or Deathwing was like notably like the last one, so I remember it's stronger than it is, so people won't suck with it and then not buy it or worse still regret buying it. But the point is that whatever the reason, whether it's altruistic or nefarious or amoral, somewhere in the middle, they purposely released things overtuned and then brought the power level down. Clearly, this is what they've been doing with the snap cards.
Yeah.
The difference being that this is a card game, and I don't know. I suppose if I'm hopeful is that it sounds like in some of the texts that we're going to look at, perhaps maybe they're rethinking that or going to dial it back. I'm not sure. But you know,
And this also raises the big pay to win question, right? And I think Safety did a good job bringing this up. It's like when things are so hilariously imbalanced, there's no denying that when you have the big overpowered card for the month it's overpowered, you essentially have paid to win more. There's not really like, can anyone deny that by having Blob, you probably had a much more successful time playing Marvel Snap in the last month? I don't think anyone can argue against that reasonably, you know?
yeah, no, it's yeah. And you don't have to get good to play Blob. You just play it because it's a card. It's not a character like in a MOBA. So I find that analogy somewhat troubling. I hope that perhaps that was maybe something spoken in reactively. I don't want them to balance Snap like a MOBA. I don't like MOBAs, but I liked HOTS, but most people said that was like MOBA Lite. This was before Snap came out. Before Unite came out. But I digress. I just, when I just would like there to be a little bit more consistency. Like I think had Blob been released in the state that it's in right now, like we'll see if Blob eats another nerf or not. I hope it doesn't have to, and it's not oppressive. I don't know. It's still so early, but I think we can agree that it's still very good at its current power level. So perhaps maybe, I don't know. I don't do game balance. I don't think they have a very easy task, but it's still a task that they've opted to take on. So, the number I think that you cited, 14 out of 18 cards have changed. Hopefully we can bring that down a little.
Yeah, and
know.
I think they've flat out admitted even by their standards, it's not been like this. This hasn't been good.
No.
Like it has not been, and I think it ends up being not good for them. Like I put out my video today about going over what it took. I finally hit full collection, and so I tallied up everything I've spent on the game and all the time I put in and all this stuff. And in the video at the end, I mentioned like I want to cut back spending on Marvel Snap, and it's mainly because I don't feel very positive about reinforcing the way things have been going for the last like 4 or 5 months. It feels like it just encourages the direction rather than like it just tells them, well, if people are willing to continue paying us all this money when we're doing not a great job, what's the incentive to do a better job, right?
I want to reduce my spending because it's expensive. So
That too.
I'm gonna. It's not that I disagree with you, but I want to give you a different perspective. I don't really think that, that old trope always frustrates me. Like vote with your wallet. Like my only agency over life is my consumption as a human being. I find that somewhat.
Well, it's a rigged system, right? The
But
thing with
here's
mobile
the thing.
games
Yeah,
is
you told
you
me
don't vote fairly, right? Like
Right.
it's not a fair. It's not everyone gets a vote. It's the person paying $200+ a month, they get 200 votes, and the free to play person, they don't get a vote, right?
So
Like
does
it's
your
not
spend-
fair.
So going back to what you said, does your spend actually influence policy? Because I mean, sure,
It
I
might
don't know
not.
what that number is. I'm sure for me it would make me pass out, and I'm gonna watch the video. But I know, like the split whales, we joke about them, like people who pay to split their car. Like the spend is exponential, right? So it's really only those people who are dropping, you know, 10, 20, 30, 100 times like the average spender that might move that dial. I think
Well, I
that
think it does add up between like there are different tiers, right? Like it's crazy to me that I've seen so many people call themselves like a small spender and say they're spending like, I don't know, like $50 or more a month. It's like, that's kind of crazy to me. That, I mean, it's kind of true in the relative to like how much some people spend in Snap, but like $50 a month on a mobile game is kind of nuts. Like, and I say it as someone who spends money on the game more than that. Like, it's just like, it's the sense is really warped. But I do think, so while it's not exactly a fair voting system, right? Like the people who spend the most, they're the ones that the company's going to, respond to the most. I do think they're not the only ones people respond to when, let's say, if a lot of the people who are spending that, let's say, $50 a month or whatever, if a lot of those people start not spending as much, I do think that adds up. Now, that's you would have to have a lot of those people stop doing that. And will that happen? We will never know because we don't have enough of the data, right? So it could be entirely inconsequential, right? Which is a fair thing to bring up because that's why I like agree with you that the voting with your wallet is often, we all want to make ourselves feel like we have more impact than we do on some of these things, right? I think that's where a lot of it comes from. So it's partly that, but it's also partly, like you said, the game is expensive and I would like to just spend less money on it. And then there's a third issue and this, I think it'll be very interesting when we get that mastery feature that's coming soon.
I'm scared.
Scared. So as like someone who spent a bunch of money on the game and who enjoys cosmetics, I have a variant for not every, but almost every character in the game. So my incentive to continue to engage with the cosmetic side of it outside of, I like splitting cards. I'm not paying extra money to keep splitting cards. But my incentive to like buy the cosmetics has fallen down a lot because I have one I like for, most of the cards I own. So why would I keep engaging with it when, yeah, you could argue maybe they'll make one you like more, but it's crazy to me the amount of money they're leaving on the table by not having a like multi-favorite system, kind of like we saw in Hearthstone with the favoriting multiple skins.
Well, and you can favor multiple card backs and multiple
yeah, it's like, why is this not a thing?
Right? Avatars.
And
but how many years did we have to wait for that in Hearthstone? So
I know, but like
many.
Also, couldn't they have, is it not possible to have learned that from Hearthstone? Like, why do we need to relearn some of these lessons other games have already figured out, right?
Oh man, it's like, this is like the folly of software development, right? Everyone feels compelled to reinvent the wheel. And we're seeing that happen in real time here.
And it's funny because that's what Second Dinner did. They reinvented the wheel on the gameplay side and people love it. And then they reinvented the wheel on the monetization side for card game wise. And people have not loved it. So it's like, it's difficult. It is difficult. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that it's so free. And I've suggested this, right? Like as a person in the creator program, we have a chance to suggest things. Not that they're necessarily going to listen to what we suggest or whatever, but we have an opportunity to suggest things. And that is one of the things I have suggested really, really hard. And the response I've gotten is basically amounts to, we like this idea, we'd like to do it, but it's not like a priority feature, like because they have other stuff they're working on. And that's fair, but I just think it must be more difficult to imagine than, the average layman would assume, like me. Like, I have no background in game design and software stuff, so I don't know how hard it is to implement that feature. But I've got to imagine, speaking as someone who spends money on cosmetics and falls into that demographic, I feel like if they want to sell more cosmetics, that is a very, very simple way to get people to buy more cosmetics. But maybe they think their new mastery system will be enough, right? Maybe they think that,
albums.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, albums, it's funny, albums had a very controversial release. I think it's the most mad I've seen people at Snap since the Mobius debacle. But it sounds like albums have been a smash hit for them. And so it's like it makes sense that that kind of thing is profitable for them. And if that works, I guess it works. But they also missed a lot with that on release too, right? Like a lot of the reason people were mad was because people wanted to engage with this new feature, which is the emotes, right? And they couldn't engage with the emotes without engaging with albums, and albums had, their own flaws.
Well, we know albums were successful because of this clearly scientific metric, which is every Born to Be Cosmo host has completed at least one album, right? You and I, Zombies, completed the hip one, so we got the Keep It Cosmo
Yep.
Cosmo emote, and Nate finished the Venomized one, right? You finished it, right, Nate?
I did, and I'm only like I think one away from. I think I'm only missing Ant-Man from the hip. So
No, you can almost keep it Cosmo.
Yeah. And I assure you that the only reason I got Dan Hipp's Ant-Man, as much as I love the Dan Hipps, I had an Ant-Man I liked already, the ant, right? From last April, the Ant-Man that's an ant, stealing the cookie from the cookie jar.
Yep.
But I wanted the emote, so I got another Ant-Man variant that I never would have gotten under any other circumstance.
How many times have you used the emote? That's my question.
Me?
I always forget that I even have the Venom emote, right? Like I like the Kingpin and the Kingpin avatar more than I like the emote that I always forget I have because I despise the emotes.
So I use the Cosmo emote in very specific circumstances. Now, before you judge me as a bad person, I want to point out that I copied ZombiesGoNomNom homework. So Zombies is at fault for this. But if I forget to mute someone or they emote me and then it backfires, you drop the Cosmo and the Shades emote and it just ends it, right? It feels so satisfying. When the person's like snapping and mismarveling you and you just like drop.
It's the great response.
It's the mic drop, right?
Yeah, it is the mic drop. It really is. It's like that's the main time I use the emote. Or if it's Loki, because I have a personal vendetta against all things Loki.
The other time I use it is if someone recognizes me and they kind of like emote me. Like if I queue into Big Deep Blade or whatever, I use that to say hi or whatever. So I use it, but I tend, if I could auto mute, I would just probably end up doing that, like I do
I think
in
most
Magic the
people
Gathering Arena.
would. Is Arena the only one I think Arena's the only one that has an auto mute?
It's the only one I've played that does. Runeterra doesn't, Hearthstone doesn't, although you can do it in the deck tracker.
We need to petition Untapped to make that a feature.
Pokemon TCG Live doesn't do that. They did, for whatever reason. I guess the game designers really love this like way of communicating with your fellow gamer. All right, speaking of communicating, we should probably move on to our final balance change. We went down a little bit of a tangent there, but that was a good conversation. The last change, another unexpected buff, Dagger. Dagger got changed from a 2/2 to a 2/0, but now buffs at +3 for each enemy card opposite Dagger when Dagger moves. Now, this is a pretty significant buff because we've seen that in terms of like buffs, 2 versus 3 is really big, right? Silver Surfer comes to mind, but there were other times where we reduced from 3 to 2. Although I think this is warranted because Dagger's trigger condition to gain that power it's a build around, right? It's a move strategy.
Yeah, so. You're not. Yeah, this is weird. It was kind of out of left field, and I think it's fine. I don't know if it's the buff move was particularly hoping for, but hey, it's something interesting to try out at the very least, if nothing else.
I can't believe Heimdall's never gotten a buff. Could we just like talk about that for a second for all the pour one out for the Heimdall?
9 power Heimdall, please.
Yeah.
Give him 9 power. Let him be under Shang-Chi. I've been playing some Heimdall move stuff. I actually really have been enjoying it surprisingly. I never liked move as an archetype, like base move, because it always felt like you feel very like 5-head when it works. But it's often very telegraphed and like It feels like you have to put in a lot more brain power to not get any more win percentage.
What's the
Is the
meme,
issue,
right?
right?
The classic turn 6 play is Heimdall into lose.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, although I have started to enjoy it more recently, I still prefer stuff like the Phoenix Force or the stuff that's more about moving your opponent's stuff with like Spider-Man and Polaris and all that. That's just a preference, but I have been playing some Dagger in Phoenix Force, and I had a game the other day where I won the game because I didn't get my multiple man, but I had a Dagger, and I brought back the Dagger with Phoenix Force, and oh boy, she got really big. She got really big. It was like a 25 power card or something.
Damn,
Wow.
those are blob numbers.
Yeah. Blob wishes he was as big as Dagger.
So it's a cool change. I don't think it's gonna make Dagger oppressive
No.
or more relevant than it was, but I'm sure for those that enjoy classic move decks with Dagger will appreciate this change. So
especially with a power reduced to 0, you have to move it multiple times to get value out of it. So it's a little bit different. I don't think it's oppressive at all. Yeah.
No, definitely not. It is, I think it's about as far from being oppressive as it could be. It's fine. It's a little weaker to Shadow King now, I guess. You can cheat it out with Ravona for cheaper. You can put it in Mr. Negative. These are
yeah,
all
we
things
didn't
you're never
talk
gonna
about
do.
that.
Oh no,
Blob
Mr.
is
Negative.
the new face of Mr. Negative, right?
Yeah, I built a deck around it, although I haven't played it yet. So
This is what every aspiring negative gamer wants to do. They want to flip the cards in their deck and then eat them so that they can't draw them.
Mhm.
I love how everyone's going like, oh, Blob's gonna make negative oppressive. It's like, I think that Blob is probably the safest card you can put down to 0.
It's just like a null, right? I mean, like,
Well, no, because with null, like you could null and then Zola it, and then that makes it huge, right? Because like it gets bigger when it like there's some
Hey,
yeah.
if for whatever reason, in the offhand chance you have a lot of stuff in your deck and you Zola a Blob, it will eat again. This is a fun interaction for those who don't know it. If you Odin a Blob, or if you Zola a Blob that stopped eating and you still have a deck, it'll re-eat cards. So
that's
that's
probably
kind of
relevant in
neat.
the Electro ramp version of it, actually.
Probably. Well, that deck usually doesn't have enough cards left for it to
Hmm.
actually matter, but it's interesting nonetheless. Like it's really, I think it's biggest with like Thanos, where if you generate an Odin or something or a Zola, uh, you are likely to still have a deck because Thanos has so many cards, and so Blob can get bigger. It's a weird fringe thing, but it's something to be aware of.
Right. Yeah. So that's the OTA. Took us what, an hour and change to get through
About an hour.
the whole.
A little
Yeah,
bit over an
We
hour,
got
yeah, not
sidetracked.
too bad.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
we-
did. We
we
talked
did.
about a few other things.
We do have a
Um,
couple of screenshots here that Zombies brought with the balance philosophy that they've shared recently.
yeah.
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit, but let's kind of look at that.
Yeah, I can just read them. Okay, so here's the first one. So there's the question. These are all from the Discord. What exactly is being done to update card balance before release? Obviously, many questions have come up about card balance in recent OTAs and patches, and a very common answer is that changes are coming to the process to balance cards before release. Personally, my faith in buying a card and it remaining similar to what I bought it for is at an all-time low. Could the team expand on what exactly is being changed to help players feel more confident in spending their limited resources? And Glenn responded, he says, I'd like to talk about this in the future when we can present it comprehensively to all players and also have the bandwidth to answer the follow-up questions. I don't want to dive into the piecemeal specifics in Discord, especially as we're even iterating on some of them.
So I don't want to be a snot, but that doesn't really answer the question at all.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't answer the question remotely.
It's like it's ask me later, bro. That's what this answer is. It's like, hey, we're working on it. We'll talk about it later when we figured it out. Is kind of what it
It does
amounts
not
to.
exactly inspire confidence, but I have a couple more. I think these all kind of go
Mhm.
together, so we can just read them. But okay.
Yeah, if you can read them, Nate, because my new glasses are
Yeah, for sure.
Still getting used to them.
Okay, here's
Thank you.
the next one. These are all from the public Discord. This is nothing that's like confidential or whatever. This is just from their Marvel Snap official Discord.
Mhm.
All right, the next one says pre-Mobius cards. How many more pre-Mobius process change cards are yet to be released? One reading of the recent response could be, "We have 6+ more months of this roller coaster ride, and I'm not sure my heart can take it." And the response by Glenn says, "Our next season will include a couple cards directly impacted by our balance process improvements, but they don't really kick in until after that." I don't even know what he's talking about.
Well,
So they said they said they've made some internal changes to hopefully have cards not miss as strongly as they have been for like the last 5 months. It's been really bad the last 5 months. People keep asking about it. We're starting to get some answers of, hey, yeah, we get it. Like, this has not been ideal. We're working on it, but there's obviously a delay, right? Like right now, someone asked about how far in advance they work, and I think they're working on like late summer or early fall cards right now. So they're working on cards like 6, 7-ish months ahead of when they release, which is pretty standard for a card game. And that's what this question is asking. It's like, hey, this started becoming a problem with like Loki and Mobius. It obviously takes time to correct that problem because you're not going to go back and necessarily tweak a lot of these other cards before they release. So when can we start seeing, if you're actually doing whatever you did to apparently make the process better, when are we going to start seeing the fruits of that labor? And it sounds like maybe next season will start, and after next season, we'll start to see it's been long enough, which I guess that tracks with Mobius releasing, 5 months ago? So next month, maybe more like March.
I just love to know what the process improvements are.
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
know.
wondering that myself. I'm curious, like, my
As
guess is the big one was season pass cards, right? Like, they specifically mentioned with Loki and Elsa, those cards weren't tested very much together because when they were wrapping up development, I guess at similar times and it was closer to launch than I guess would be ideal. So they didn't do extensive testing with Elsa and Loki together, and we saw what that resulted in. And they specifically said a while back, like season pass cards specifically, we are going to be changing how we kind of test these things and give more time to testing and other things. But that's only season pass cards, right? Like that's not talking about necessarily the other cards. And as we've seen, the issue has not just been season pass cards, though. To be fair, I guess like what 3 of them have been season pass cards.
Well, the spotlight
Loki,
system
Elsa,
as well. So
Miss Marvel.
here's one last one that really touches on that. It says economy versus balance. Since Loki's release, 14 of the most recent 21 cards have been changed within less than 4 months of their release. With the spotlight system limiting the frequency of available Series 4 and 5 cards, it's hard to know when a purchase makes sense given how often both buffs and nerfs occur. It's putting it very eloquently.
Yeah, they're being nice about it.
They really are, yeah. Are there any planned changes so that the balance and economy can work with more synergy and avoid the uncertainty in the future? Are there plans for pre-release testing to be improved so that less new cards need to be balanced shortly after their release? And the response is from Kent Eric. I don't know who this person is, but
I think they also work on the balance and design side, if I recall correctly.
Here's the response. We've been making some improvements to our initial balance pass on cards to try to get them more in line with where they should be on launch. But I will say this, landing cards at exactly the right win rate is near impossible. Further, a card's win rate is never static. New cards can come in and totally reshape a previous card's viability.
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
true, but like it also they could also miss by less wide a margin, right? Like
Well, and they
I
have
think people are understanding to, yeah, it's hard to balance things perfectly, but it's not like we've been, close to perfect. We've been pretty far off. So like I
well,
don't think anyone's expecting them to make every card perfect forever, right? But
yeah.
Well, they
like,
also
can
make
we
it
just make
hard
it a
on.
little more
Yeah,
reasonable?
they make it hard on themselves too with their schedule, right? there's four to five new cards a month, 6 if you include the battle pass that come out at a weekly interval, plus 2 OTAs and a patch. I mean, like most card games, they'll release cards every couple months, and then that's it until the next release. Between the OTAs and the drip release, like things are constantly changing.
Yeah, change is I think if there's I think if there's one way to describe Marvel Snap, it constantly changing is it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think they've just chosen to embrace that, and they're kind of expecting people to reshape their expectations in kind. And I think there's a little bit of a fundamental disconnect there in let's forget about the economy stuff for a moment, right? Let's pretend the economy is perfect and everyone's happy and it's all sunshine and rainbows. The way you progress in this game is you upgrade your cards, right? You split your cards. And a lot of people, even people I know who normally aren't very interested in cosmetics, a lot of people really like that. They think it's cool. And it's we've joked about how it's actually, its own game. Like it's the other game in Marvel Snap is the collecting. And I don't even think it's really a joke. It's just kind of true. But yeah, so that is a big part of the game. And as such, when people split their card, and this is the best example of it, when America Chavez got nerfed, I've never seen so many posts about people showing all their cool variants that they're really sad they're not going to get to play anymore. And so I think even if the economy wasn't an issue, which it is, but even if it wasn't, when their whole upgrading system naturally gets people invested in their cards, and I would say they become more invested in them than they would be just for power reasons or design reasons, then of course people are going to be more upset when change happens, and especially when it's viewed as negative change to something they like and they're invested in. And so, while again, I think the faster, like the fact that we get OTAs and all this other stuff, well, I think all this is generally a good thing. It's better for the game to have it than for not. I think there needs to be a real evaluation of some way they can reduce the friction there, because even if they fix the economy stuff, which it really feels like they're in no rush to do, according from various posts we've seen before about the gold boxes and other things, I think this issue would persist. It's like the game wants you to get very invested in a card, but it also wants you to be okay with the fact that it could change at any time. And those are just as opposed, those things are as opposed to each other as they could be. Like how are you going to, you can't fault a player for being upset when you change their favorite card that they've split 18 times, right? Especially when in the cases where maybe it isn't actually a big balance outlier and it's like Viper and they're doing it just for the sake of doing it. So it does mess with people, and I think it really does make people feel very skittish about wanting to be overly invested in anything because it feels so bad when that gets taken away. Like I remember when Arrow got nerfed the first time, and even the recent change to her, I was so mad because they changed a card I really liked. I found a niche home for this card. It was not a power outlier, but they decided they wanted to change the fundamental mechanics of moving, and she got caught in the crossfires. And so I was really, the listeners might remember, I was very irate about that change when it happened. And fortunately, the card has been okay and been playable since then, but I was still really annoyed that I had like kind of a fringe off meta deck I was succeeding with using this card I really like and enjoy playing with, even though it's not the best card in the world. And then it just gets randomly changed for the sake of making move more intuitive. And it's like how nobody was expecting an Arrow change because nobody was playing the card. So it was just moments like that cause a real frustration, and I think it makes people more hesitant to want to get invested, which you have to imagine they want you to be invested in your collection and invested into upgrading cards. Like there's a reason that's the primary way you level up in the game. It's to get people invested in the cosmetics, invested into collecting the cards. So they want that, but the way they balance and the economy on top of that has a very strong friction with Like the systems just don't complement each other well. And I don't know how you really fix that. The economy, you can fix it a variety of ways, but the other aspect of people just being invested in their cards and not liking how randomly and quickly they can change, I don't know if there is a fix for that. Like, it might just be what it is. But I don't think that's going to stop players from being upset about it.
I don't really have much more to say than that. I have a lot of mixed emotions about it all. I buy cards knowing they're going to get nerfed. I have bought cards where I've skipped cards thinking, they're probably going to buff it, which they did, and then have regrets, like with Gladiator.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want these considerations to prevent them from taking actions that need to be taken for the
Yeah, for sure.
the betterment of the game environment, like with Blob. But like I find that a lot of times in the community, these arguments become zero sum, right? You're either for the nerf or
Yes.
and to me, these things are not contradictory. You can have both sentiments. You can have regret that your investment was devalued, but still be relieved that the game state might be improved as a result, and still be frustrated
sure.
at that dynamic. And that's kind of where I sit, right? I have a lot of mixed feelings about it, and yeah, for me, it's not a question of, well, will I purchase something or not? But I go into it with a sense of trepidation as opposed to enthusiasm and excitement, which you'd think are the types of emotions you'd want your engaged community to feel when they swipe the credit card, right? So yeah.
Yeah, you think you want it to be a more positive experience, right? And it feels like for a lot of people, I think a lot of people follow in exactly what you described. Like it's people do feel that like uncertainty, and I don't know, human beings are very resistant to change naturally. We like things being the way that they are. Uh and I don't know, I think it's just hard. Like I think it's hard to find the right balance. But it feels like where we're at right now is not it. Now, maybe if they do actually improve the balance or their process or whatever, and cards are changing, but maybe more at a rate we saw them changing like a year ago or 8 months ago as opposed to 5 months ago, right? Maybe that will be better. Maybe they can find that sweet spot, but I don't really blame anyone who does not feel a large amount of confidence in that happening. I think it's kind of on them to rise to the occasion, and if they think they can do it, well, they kind of gotta do it, and not like they gotta back up the talk. They gotta walk
Yeah.
the walk.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps that's a good place to maybe start wrapping it up and ending it. I know that
I was gonna say, wiser words were
Yeah.
never spoken.
yeah.
I do want to know before we go, what has, just as like a little anecdotal experience, I know we all haven't had the most time to play, but how have you felt in the handful of games we have played after the patch compared to, before?
Blob's still good. The meta's kind of weird, and I'm struggling to find what I want to be playing. But it doesn't seem like it's really changed a whole lot.
I haven't played a lot. My experience is pretty limited, although my Thanos Blob deck still felt good. I actually queued the Death Killmonger one up by accident instead of the Kaya Scar one, and I actually think I like that better. But looking at the data, I've been watching that very closely. I think that Nate's sentiment is actually kind of reflective in the data. I know that's not my experience, but it looks like the decks that were good before are still good. It looks like the win rate disparity has tightened up a lot, right? So I think that cautiously optimistic that there's going to be more things that are viable than there were. But I think that what surprised me is how persistent Destroy has been, both in terms of win rate, play rate, and cube rate. I thought that was just going to be an aberration, but it seems like as more data comes in and more time passes, Destroyer is looking like it, if it's not going to be the deck to beat, it's certainly going to be, you're going to be seeing a lot when you queue your games up. And Destroy is kind of like, it's a built-in strategy, so I suppose that, I don't know, is that a caution? Is that a good sign?
I think from what I've seen in playing, the big thing is it's no fun when you queue into the same deck over and over again, and that deck is at a clear power disparity, and you feel like you're being punished for trying to play literally anything else because, you just want to play a deck you enjoy, but it gets farmed by, whatever tier S deck it is. Feels like that's the situation we were in, and at least in the time I've played since then, feels like we're not in that situation anymore. Thanos Blob still a top tier contender. I've seen a lot of variety though. I've seen a variety of bounce decks, like full on bounce, a nihilist bounce. Seen a bunch of destroy, like Blue mentioned, that's been popular. I've seen high evo. I've seen people are just experimenting. I've seen a bunch of Hella. So while a lot of these decks aren't necessarily new, it feels a little refreshing because for the last week or two, I saw almost none of these decks because it was all just Thanos. So
Yeah.
I'm enjoying that. I'm enjoying the fact that when I queue a game on ladder or in Conquest, I'm not groaning because it's the sixth Thanos or seventh
Thanos
Thanos
was
I've
like
faced.
it was hitting like the 20, it was hitting like Shuri Red Skull levels when that
Yeah.
was like at its peak. And Destroy, when I say it's the most popular deck, instead of it being like, 20% plus, it's depending on where you are in ladder, it's like 7-8%. It kind of skews more to lower ladder, but still seeing like over 7% post infinite. So yeah. I'm going to be playing more this weekend. I got the weekend missions to do now. It's time to
Get
maybe
your 200 tokens for Meek.
yeah, I won't be getting 200 tokens for Meek, but I still have 25 gold
Oh,
tickets to
jeez.
burn through. So yeah, if anybody wants to carry me on their back through that, it's not even like, it's just I just need the moral support to like grind through it. I don't do well with extended play sessions, so yeah, I'll be playing a little bit more this upcoming week, I think.
Yeah,
Try and
Conquest is tricky. It gets frustrating being locked in with the same deck over and over. If you happen to get like a unfavorable matchup or your opponent rolls some good locations, I think Conquest can add a high level of frustration
a lot more fun
sometimes.
beating up bots for 8 cubes.
Oh, yeah.
That's my Marvel snap. I want
Or at
to
least
like,
on ladder post infinite, you get somebody different in the next game. You have a bad beat, you just move on.
yeah,
Whereas like in Conquest, you aren't allowed to move on. You go
no.
until the bell is rung.
There's nothing more tilting than queuing into an unfavorable in Conquest. Like you
Oh,
just want to
yeah.
get out. You just have to like
Mhm.
knuckle under, like just kind of get through it. But like it's so you just want to move on. Yeah,
It's like it can be very skill testing, but it can be even more frustrating.
yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone that stayed with us from the Zombies raid and watched us live on twitch.tv. But also want to thank those that are watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, or whatever platform it is that you choose. We're always thrilled to share our Snap musings with you. And we will be back in 2 weeks to see how this meta's shaked up and talk about the new cards that release between now and then. But until then, do remember to keep a Cosmo out there. There's always another human being at the other end of your game, and try and be kind to them and not miss Marvel them if you can.
Yep. The Cosmo emote's cool though. Don't worry about that one.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Oh, keep it Cosmo, everybody.
Keep it Cosmo.
Enough said, bub.